Welcome to this talk by Oxford University Press on the changes that have been made in the new Cambridge IGCSE economics syllabus. In this video, I'm going to focus on Units 1 to 3, which cover microeconomics. In Unit 1, the basic economic problem, the difference between economic goods and free goods is now included in the syllabus. In your lessons on this topic, you might like to discuss the difference between economic goods and free goods. You could go on to discuss whether fresh air, for example, is an example of an economic good or a free good. The topic of economic goods and free goods is covered on pages 4 to 5 of the Essential Economics textbook. There is a very interesting case study in relation to watching Real Madrid play in Barcelona in Spain's La Liga. The topic of economic goods and free goods is also covered on page 9 of the Exam Success in Economics book. The difference between a movement along a production possibility curve and a shift of a production possibility curve is also now included in the new syllabus. You might like to discuss the challenge of teaching this particular distinction. In Unit 2, the allocation of resources, the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics is now included in the syllabus, along with the decision makers involved in each. You might like to consider how you would use different decision makers to illustrate this important difference. The difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics is covered on pages 22 to 23 of the Essential Economics textbook. Opportunity cost is a key concept in the economics syllabus. You might like to consider how you could use examples of opportunity cost to show the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Another change in Unit 2 in the new syllabus is that the consequences of market failure and government intervention to address market failure are now included. These consequences are covered on page 55 of the Essential Economics book and on page 66 of the Exam Success book. In Unit 3, Microeconomic Decision Makers, students are now required to understand the advantages and disadvantages of trade union activity. You might like to consider how you would meet the challenge of ensuring that your teaching of this topic was fair to both sides of the argument. In the Part D questions in Section B of Paper 2, the command word is usually discussed. And in these questions, students are often required to look at 2 points of view and then come to a conclusion. Many of the answers to questions on trade unions are very one-sided, focusing on their potential disadvantages and writing very little, if anything, on their potential advantages. However, these questions are out of 8 marks, and the maximum, the absolute maximum that a candidate can gain for a one-sided answer is 5 out of 8. So it is very important that students are able to look at economic issues and problems from 2 points of view if they are to gain maximum marks in these questions. Another change in Unit 3 is that the section on the objectives of firms has been widened to include not only profit maximisation, but also survival, social welfare, and growth. You will now be able to engage the students in discussions about corporate social responsibility. And you might like to think of possible examples of corporate social responsibility in your area. I've covered some of the new themes that are included in the new syllabus. But it's also important to point out that some aspects of the previous syllabus are no longer included. Out of the new syllabus go detailed knowledge of the structure of different kinds of firms, such as sole traders and partnership. You won't need to cover those in detail. Also out are functions of stock exchanges. In addition, it is stated clearly in the new syllabus that diagrams are not required for competitive markets and monopoly markets. So, here are some of the headlines of this video. The first headline is that in Unit 1, the new syllabus includes the difference between economic goods and free goods, and the difference between movements along a PPC and shifts in a PPC. Another important headline is that in Unit 2, the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics is now included. The consequences of market failure and government intervention to address market failure are also now included. The third headline is that in Unit 3, the advantages and disadvantages of trade union activity are included. Also, the objectives of firms have been widened to include not only profit maximisation, but also social welfare, including corporate social responsibility, and survival and growth. A fourth and final headline is that as well as bringing in new themes and concepts, the new syllabus no longer requires a detailed knowledge of the functions of stock exchanges or the structure of different types of business organisation. Thank you so much for watching this video on changes in Units 1 to 3 of the new syllabus, and I hope to see you next time. In this video, I'm going to focus on Units 4 to 6, which cover macroeconomics. In Unit 4, Government and the Macroeconomy, there have not been any major changes in terms of topics being brought into this new syllabus or left out of the previous syllabus. But it has now been structured better to make it clearer for both students and teachers. In Unit 5, Economic Development, the concept of an optimum population is now included in the syllabus. You might like to consider what is meant by an optimum population and how you would judge whether a country was overpopulated or underpopulated. The concept of an optimum population is covered on pages 192 to 193 of the Essential Economics textbook. One of the summary questions asks, how might a small country be underpopulated and a large one overpopulated? Optimum population is also covered on page 183 of the exam success book, where the benefits and disadvantages of a change in the size of population of a country, both increases and decreases in size, are considered. Other changes in Unit 5 include the inclusion of the concept of real GDP per head. There is no reference to real in the current syllabus, but it's important that students understand the importance of making adjustments in data to take account of the impact of inflation. The syllabus refers to the components of both real GDP and HDI, and to the advantages and disadvantages of real GDP and HDI as ways to compare living standards in different countries. In Unit 6, International Trade and Globalization, the concept of globalization is now included in the syllabus. It may seem odd, given the importance of globalization, that this concept has not been included in the syllabus before, but it is certainly in the syllabus now. Definitions of globalization can vary a great deal, so you might like to think about the meaning of the term. The nature of globalization, including both the potential benefits and the possible disadvantages, is covered on pages 206 to 207 of the Essential Economics book. There is an interesting case study on the impact of globalization on the Caribbean countries. There are also 3 questions on globalization in the summary questions. Question 1 states, using the example of your country's economy, list ways in which the following groups are benefiting from globalization. Firstly, businesses, secondly, the government, and thirdly, consumers. Question 2 states, using your country's economy, give specific examples of businesses and consumers suffering as a result of globalization. And question 3 states, define globalization in just 2 sentences. The topic of globalization, as well as the role of multinational companies, is also covered on page 192 of the exam success book. In the recap section on that page, it states that globalization allows economies to become increasingly connected. As barriers between countries are reduced, a greater amount of trade can take place. In the Raise Your Grade section at the end of Unit 6 of the exam success book, there is a 6-mark question included. Analyze the key features of globalization. So, here are some of the headlines of this video. The first headline is that in Unit 4, the new syllabus is structured in an improved way that makes it clearer for both students and teachers. Another important headline is that in Unit 5, the concepts of optimum population and real GDP are included in the syllabus for the first time. A third headline is that in Unit 6, the concept of globalization is included in the syllabus for the first time, a key concept in helping students to understand the reality of the economic world in the 21st century in which we live. Thank you so much for watching this video on changes in Units 4 to 6 of the new syllabus, and I hope to see you next time. The examination consists of two papers, Paper 1 and Paper 2. Paper 1 consists of 30 multiple choice questions, and candidates need to answer all 30 questions. There is 1 mark for each question. Candidates will have 45 minutes to complete this paper, and it constitutes 30% of the total marks for the IGCSE. Paper 2 consists of 2 sections, Section A and Section B. There is no change to Section A. Candidates answer 1 compulsory question that usually contains 8 sub-questions. The questions are based on information provided in the question paper. There are 30 marks available for this question. The major change in the new syllabus is that in Section B, the element of choice has been reduced. In the present structure, there are 6 questions in Section B, and candidates are required to answer 3 of these. Each of the questions is subdivided into 4 parts. However, with the present arrangement, this requires candidates to spend quite a lot of time reading all these questions before deciding which 3 they're going to answer. With the new syllabus, candidates will still answer 3 questions from Section B, but instead of choosing 3 from a choice of 6, they will choose 3 from a choice of 4. Each of the questions will contain 4 sub-parts. Part A will usually start with the command word define and will carry 2 marks. Part B will usually start with the command word describe or explain and will carry 4 marks. Part C will usually start with the command word analyze and will carry 6 marks. Finally, Part D will usually start with the command word discuss and will carry 8 marks. The meanings of each of the command words are now included in the new syllabus on page 23. Each of the 3 questions answered in Section B of Paper 2 will have 20 marks. The total marks for Paper 2 will therefore be 30 marks from Section A and 60 marks from Section B, making a total of 90 marks. Paper 2 constitutes 70% of the total marks for the IGCSE. Candidates will have 2 hours and 15 minutes to complete this paper. There are 3 assessment objectives in IGCSE Economics. AO1, Knowledge and Understanding, has a 50% weighting in Paper 1 and a 35% weighting in Paper 2. This makes a total of 40% weighting across the 2 papers. AO2 Analysis has a 50% weighting in Paper 1 and a 35% weighting in Paper 2, making a total of 40% across the 2 papers. This is exactly the same as for AO1, Knowledge and Understanding. AO3 Evaluation has a 0% weighting in Paper 1 and a 30% weighting in Paper 2. This makes a total of 20% weighting across the 2 papers. It's very important that you understand the meaning of the 3 assessment objectives. In AO1, Knowledge and Understanding, learners should be able to show knowledge and understanding of economic definitions, formulas, concepts and theories. To use economic terminology. It is important that students use the appropriate economic terms and economic concepts in their exam answers as much as possible. In AO2, Analysis, learners should be able to select, organize and interpret data, use economic information and data to recognize patterns and to deduce relationships, apply economic analysis to written, numerical, diagrammatic and graphical data, analyze economic issues and situations, identifying and developing links. It's very important that students understand that to analyze something, they need to focus on the links between different elements or different concepts in a given situation. Finally, in AO3, Evaluation, learners should be able to evaluate economic information and data, distinguish between economic analysis and unreasoned statements, recognize the uncertainties of the outcomes of economic decisions and events, communicate economic thinking in a logical manner, use the revision checklist in the exam success guide to make sure your students are on track. It is important that students understand that they need to think and write in a reasoned and logical manner. So here are some of the headlines of this video. The first headline is that the economics exam is made up of 2 papers. Paper 1 consists of 30 multiple choice questions, all of which need to be answered. Paper 2 consists of 1 compulsory question in section A, carrying 30 marks, and 3 questions that need to be answered in section B, each carrying 20 marks. Another important headline is that in section B of paper 2, the range of choice is more restricted than in the present structure. Instead of choosing 3 questions from a possible 6 questions, students will choose 3 questions from a possible 4 questions. The advantage of this is that students will be able to spend less time reading and more time writing. A third headline is that it's important that students clearly understand the meaning of the different command words that will be used in the exam, such as define, describe, explain, analyze, and discuss. The meanings of these different command words are now included in the new syllabus. Finally, a fourth headline is that students need to understand that there are 3 distinct assessment objectives. AO1 concerns knowledge and understanding, AO2 concerns analysis, and AO3 concerns evaluation. Thank you so much for watching this video on the assessment structure of the new syllabus, and I hope to see you next time. This video will focus on the first 3 units of the syllabus, which are concerned with microeconomics. I have a number of top tips which will help students achieve the best possible grade that they are capable of achieving in the exam. Top tip 1 is that students need to make sure that they thoroughly revise all of the topics in each section of the syllabus. It is no good students only revising some of the topics and hoping only these come up in the exam. It is very unlikely that students would be so lucky, and my answer to such an approach would be in your dreams. There is a revision checklist at the beginning of each of the units in the exam success book. This is the revision checklist at the beginning of Unit 1 on the basic economic problem. Students can tick the boxes on the right-hand side of the checklist to build a record of their revision. Top tip 2 is that students need to make sure that they thoroughly understand the meanings of the key terms used in economics. This page from the exam success book focuses on the factors of production and includes the meanings of 6 key terms: factors of production, land, labor, capital, enterprise, and entrepreneur. The meanings of the key terms are also included in a glossary at the end of the book on pages 206 to 208. Top tip 3 is that students need to be given advice on what they need to do in the exam. These exam tips are given throughout the exam success book. For example, on this page, one exam tip is that it is risk-taking that distinguishes an entrepreneur from other workers, stressing that the risk arises from the uncertainty of enterprise initiatives. Another exam tip on this page is that a helpful way to remember the 4 factors of production is for students to think of their cell phone: C for capital, E for enterprise, L for land, and L for labor. Top tip 4 is that students need to avoid making the same mistake that other students have made in exams over the years. The exam success book points out many of these common errors. For example, on page 10, in the common error section, it states, "Do not confuse the use of the term capital as a factor of production with another use of the term to refer to money." This is a common mistake which is often made by students in exams. Finally, top tip 5 is that students have to be given opportunities to gain experience of exam-style questions. On page 11 of the exam success book, 3 exam-style questions on the factors of production are included in the apply section. Question 1 is define the meaning of the factors of production, land, and labor. Question 2 is explain what is meant by capital as a factor of production. And question 3 is describe how the factor of production enterprise is rewarded. Exam style questions are also included in the Raise Your Grade sections at the end of each unit. This example, exam style question 3, has 4 questions. Define, using an example, the fact of production capital for 2 marks. B says explain how the quantity and quality of the fact of production land could be increased. That's for 4 marks. Part C says analyse why decisions made by workers involve an opportunity cost for 6 marks. And finally D, discuss whether incentives will always lead to an improvement in the mobility of factors of production for 8 marks. The questions are followed by an analysis, explaining what each of the 4 questions are looking for, then a mark scheme, then a student answer, and then finally examiner feedback on that answer, pointing out how the student answer could have been improved. So, here are some of the headlines of this video in the form of top tips. Top tip 1 is that students need to thoroughly revise all of the syllabus content before the exam. Top tip 2 is that students need to make sure that they thoroughly understand the meanings of the key terms used in economics. Top tip 3 is that students need to be given advice on what they need to do in the exam through a series of exam tips. Top tip 4 is that students need to avoid making the same mistake that other students have made in exams over the years. The common error sections point out the different mistakes that students have been making over these years. And finally, top tip 5 is that students have to be given opportunities to gain experience of exam style questions. There are many of the questions in the apply sections throughout the book, and also in the Raise Your Grade sections at the end of each unit. These Raise Your Grade sections not only have exam style questions, but they also contain an analysis of what the examiners are looking for in each question, the mark scheme, a student answer, and examiner feedback pointing out how the student answer could have been substantially improved. Thank you so much for watching this video on how to achieve exam success in the microeconomics part of the new syllabus. And I hope to see you next time. This video will focus on the last 3 units of the syllabus which are concerned with macroeconomics. I have a number of top tips which will help students achieve the best possible grade that they are capable of achieving in the examination. Top tip 1 is that students need to make sure that they thoroughly revise all of the topics in each section of the syllabus. It is no good students only revising some of the topics and hoping that only these come up in the exam. There is a revision checklist at the beginning of each of the units in the exam success book. This is the revision checklist at the beginning of Unit 4 on government and the macroeconomy. Students can tick the boxes on the right-hand side of the checklist to build a record of their revision. Top tip 2 is that students need to make sure that they thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly, understand the meanings of the key terms used in economics. This page from the exam success book focuses on the role of government and includes the meanings of 6 key terms: bilateral, multilateral, the European Union, the North American Free Trade Area, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. The meanings of the key terms are also included in a glossary at the end of the book on pages 206 to 208. Top tip 3 is that students need to be given advice on what they need to do in the exam. These exam tips are given throughout the exam success book. For example, on this page, one exam tip is that students need to be able to give examples in the exam of the role of government at the local, national, and international level. Top tip 4 is that students need to avoid making the same mistakes that other students have made in exams over the years. The exam success book points out many of these common errors. For example, on page 135 in the common error section, it states, candidates sometimes state that a progressive tax is one that takes more money from the rich than from the poor. But you need to understand that it is progressive because it takes a higher proportion of the income of the rich than the poor. This is a common mistake which is often made by students in exams. If a person paid more in tax as their income increased, this could be a proportional tax. For example, a worker might pay 25% of their income in tax, so as their income increases, so will their tax payments. What makes a tax progressive is that the rate of tax increases as incomes rise. For example, income tax might start at 10% and then go up to 20%, 30%, 40%, 50% or even higher. The rate of income tax for high income earners in the UK once reached the staggering level of 83%. Finally, top tip 5 is that students have to be given opportunities to gain experience of exam-style questions. On page 141 of the Exam Success Book, 2 exam-style questions on monetary policy are included in the Apply section at the top of the page. Question 1 is distinguish between a narrow money supply and a broad money supply. Question 2 is explain how monetary policy operates in an economy. There is also a multiple choice question in the Apply section at the bottom of that page. The question asks which of the following is an example of contractionary monetary policy, and 4 possible answers are given. A, a decrease in the rate of interest. B, an increase in taxation. C, an increase in the money supply. And D, an increase in the rate of interest. By the way, the answer is D, an increase in the rate of interest. Some students might have thought that B could also have been a possible answer, but an increase in taxation is an example of fiscal policy, not monetary policy. Exam-style questions are also included in the Raise Your Grade sections at the end of each unit. This example, exam-style question 1, has 4 questions. Define the term fiscal policy for 2 marks. Explain 2 reasons for taxation for 4 marks. Analyze 3 qualities of a good tax for 6 marks. And finally, indeed, discuss whether the government should plan for a budget deficit for 8 marks. The questions are followed by an analysis, explaining what each of the 4 questions are looking for, a mark scheme, a student answer, and examiner feedback on that answer, pointing out how the student answer could have been substantially improved. So, here are some of the headlines of this video in the form of top tips. Top tip 1 is that students need to thoroughly revise all of the syllabus content before the exam. Top tip 2 is that students need to make sure that they thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly, understand the meanings of the key terms used in economics. Top tip 3 is that students need to be given advice on what they need to do in the exam through a series of exam tips. Top tip 4 is that students need to avoid making the same mistake that other students have made in exams over the years. The common error sections point out the different mistakes that students have been making over the years. Finally, top tip 5 is that students have to be given opportunities to gain experience of exam-style questions. There are many of the questions in the Apply sections throughout the book, and also in the Raise Your Grade sections at the end of each unit. These Raise Your Grade sections not only have exam-style questions, but they also contain an analysis of what the examiners are looking for in each question, the mark scheme, a student answer, and examiner feedback pointing out how the student answer could have been improved. Thank you so much for watching this video on how to achieve exam success in the macroeconomics part of the new syllabus, and I hope to see you next time. Hi everyone, welcome to this talk by Oxford University Press on some of the questions that students have asked on achieving success in IGCSE economics exams. This video will focus on 3 frequently asked questions. The first frequently asked question is how to produce a good answer to the 8-mark discuss questions in the D parts of questions in section B of paper 2. We looked at one of these questions in the Raise Your Grade section at the end of unit 1. In exam style question 3 on page 25 of the Exam Success book, Part D asked students to discuss whether incentives will always lead to an improvement in the mobility of factors of production. The first thing to point out is that in these discuss questions there will be 2 points of view or approaches that will need to be compared and contrasted. The maximum mark for a one-sided answer is 5 out of the 8 marks, however good it is. This means that if a student produces one-sided answers, they will lose 3 possible marks. They will answer 3 questions in section B of paper 2, so they could lose 3 marks on 3 occasions. This loss of 9 marks could mean a difference of at least 1 grade in their final result. So, the key thing to stress is that in these discuss questions, students need to make sure that they cover both possible points of view. Sometimes there's a word included in the question to nudge the student to provide an appropriate answer. For example, in this question about whether incentives will lead to an improvement in the mobility of factors of production, the key word is always. This is pointing out to the student that it might sometimes lead to such an improvement, but this will not necessarily always be the case. The second frequently asked question is whether diagrams should be included in answers. Sometimes a question will explicitly require students to include a diagram, and so in answering these questions, a diagram must be included. However, even in those questions that do not explicitly require students to include a diagram, it is usually a good idea to include such a diagram to support an answer. The most likely diagram that will be needed in an exam will be a demand and supply diagram. You will see here such a diagram from page 47 of the Exam Success book on market equilibrium. However, there are a number of points that must be made in relation to the drawing of diagrams. Firstly, the diagram must be clearly and accurately drawn so that it can be understood by the examiners. Secondly, the axes must be clearly labelled with price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. Unfortunately, it is clear that some students in exams still get muddled about this and label the axes the wrong way. Thirdly, the demand and supply curves must be clearly labelled with the demand curve sloping downwards from left to right and the supply curve sloping upwards from left to right. Unfortunately, some students in exams get confused about this also and label the 2 curves or lines the wrong way round. The third frequently asked question relates to how a government could try to solve, or at least reduce, some of its economic problems, such as reducing a high level of unemployment. Students are generally reasonably good at writing about monetary policy and fiscal policy, but they are less confident when writing about supply-side policy. Monetary and fiscal policy both look at the problem from the demand viewpoint, and so the solution to high unemployment in an economy would be to use monetary and fiscal policies to stimulate demand so that more people would be able to obtain a job. Supply-side policy, on the other hand, looks at the problem from the supply viewpoint. There are 3 questions that relate to supply-side policies on these 2 pages. One is explain what is meant by supply-side policy, and another is describe 2 examples of a supply-side measure. The third question states analyze the advantages and disadvantages of improving education as a supply-side policy measure. In questions on supply-side policies, students need to show that they understand how firms can become more efficient and so be able to supply more. Examples of such policies include investment in education and training schemes, make workers more productive, measures to reduce the power of trade unions so that labour markets can become more flexible, lower levels of income tax to encourage more people to enter the workforce, deregulation, where various restrictions are reduced or withdrawn, policies to lower the tax burden on firms. These are known as tax holidays. It is clear from reading many answers to questions on how to deal with economic problems, such as unemployment, that while many students are able to produce relatively good answers on monetary policies and fiscal policies, they generally produce weaker answers to questions about supply side policies. So, here are some of the headlines of this video. The first headline is that one frequently asked question is in relation to how to score maximum marks in the 8 marks discussed questions. The main thing to stress is that students need to look at both points of view to gain a mark of more than 5. The 2 points of view do not need to be covered evenly. If they're covered evenly, a mark of 8 can be gained through a 4 + 4 combination of marks. However, it will not matter if one point of view is covered in greater depth than the other, because a mark of 8 can also be gained through a 5 + 3 combination or a 3 + 5 combination. Another important headline is that it is usually a good idea for students to include a diagram in their answers. Of course, if a question explicitly asks for a diagram, then a student must include a diagram. However, in other questions where a diagram is not explicitly asked for, marks can be given to diagrams if they clearly support an answer. However, students need to remember to label them correctly. A third headline is that in knowing how to deal with economic problems, such as a high rate of unemployment, students need to be able to write with confidence, not only about monetary and fiscal policies, but also supply side policies, such as improvements in education and policies to bring about greater deregulation. Thank you so much for watching this video on 3 of the most frequently asked questions about doing well in IGCSE economic exams. This is the final video, and I hope you've enjoyed watching them.